When I was 6 years old, on Christmas Day, I received my first gaming console ever, the N64. I still have that same console to this day, as well as all the other games I ever got for it. My all-time favorite game for it has to be Donkey Kong 64. Even as a young kid, I was determined to beat it, and did a couple of times, even to 101%. There is a lot to love about the game, and over the years, I have always found time to go back to it. As one tends to do with old games they love, a few months ago I decided to challenge myself. I was going to put a handicap on what I could allow myself to do in the game, but still be able to beat it. What I planned to do was not use Tiny for any golden bananas, and just for her boss battle in Fantic Factory. I was not sure if it was even possible. To be honest, I had not played it in a year before I started, and I did not do any research of whether it could be possible.
Hey, so I'm looking at my bill and my FICO credit score.
However, I had a feeling it could. All went as planned though, the first part of the game. Despite the long period away from the jungle, I still seem to have my skills. I got all of the golden bananas I could get with DK and Diddy and Jungle Japes in about an hour.
You sound really different.
After unlocking the first lock to K. Lumsey's cage, I opened the portal to Angry Al's dick. I quickly made my way over to the building that housed Tiny's prison and began to solve the puzzle. For whatever reason, I decided that I would stop and come back later. I guess I did not want to unlock Tiny until I absolutely had to. However, as I was going back to the pool to leave, Diddy stopped. The camera went back to Tiny. Her speech bubble came up. "Hey, you better not leave me here." I blinked and hesitated for a bit. As far as I could remember, that was not supposed to be there. Then again, I had never left the puzzle half done, so maybe it was just something new that I had not noticed before. As the camera panned back to Diddy, I decided to go ahead and finish the puzzle. After I finished hitting the buttons to spell out Kong, the gate to Tiny's prison lowered. She went through her usual celebratory animation. Strangely, as her bubble came up, it started out something different than before. "I knew you wouldn't forget me." I knew that was not supposed to be there. The rest of her text was as normal as I could remember though. When she banana ported to the tag barrel and left the golden banana, I went to collect it. Then proceeded as normal. I thought about the weird text, but figured that it was just something new that I had never seen before. It was nice to see something refreshing and new in such an old game, even if it was a little weird. After that, I went through Angry Alzak as per usual, up to the point where it was time to save Lanky in the Llama's temple. I had kept the promise to myself and had not selected Tiny in the tag barrel, not even scanned over her, so all was well on that account. I activated the instrument pad with DK, the llama splat into the lava, and I had DK shoot the coconut switch to open up Lanky's prison. Lanky rolled around and made his usual noise, but after he said that he would be in the tag barrel, he had something else. But I don't think it's safe to be next to Tiny, so choose me quick. Now I was getting confused. I wonder if my brother had somehow hacked the cartridge. Since he had done so in the past, I figured he could have. After all, it was just text that text was altered. That could not be hard. I was getting more interested by it anyway, so I extended my intended playtime by another hour. Just to humor Lanky, I quickly headed to the tag barrel after collecting his golden banana and choose him. However, I noticed that even though I had not moved over her, Tiny started stomping the ground as if I had gone to her but did not choose her. Again, it was odd, but I quickly forgot about it as the parrot came down to inform Lanky that he also had 5 golden bananas to find on the map. Everything kept going as normal as I got Lanky some of his coins, and got enough bananas between DK, Diddy, and Lanky to get to the boss. Each time I went into the tag barrel all that time, though, Tiny would stomp the ground and whine, as if throwing a fit. I just kept thinking it was either a glitch or a part of the hack I was certain my brother possibly did to the cartridge. After beating the giant dragonfly, I extended the level and headed over to the little island with K. Lumsey's cage. He opened up paths to Fantic Factory and Gloomy Leon, and I chose to go to Fantic Factory first. Upon entering the portal, as usual, the camera flashed over to Clunky in his cage hanging above a square room. Instead of pleading for help when his speech bubble came up, he said something different. No need to save Clunky. Clunky is safe up here. Now I knew something was up, but I was still getting interested. It seemed that the other Kongs were getting afraid of Tiny for some reason. I thought it was funny, and I wanted to see how far it would go. My curiosity made me work a little faster to get to Chunky. As I went into the tag tunnel to select Lanky to get him down, I noticed that Tiny was jumping up and down, stomping the ground with both feet as she yelled. I watched her do that for a few seconds before I finally hit the A button to get Lanky out of the barrel. I went up the pipe and stomped on Lanky's switch, and Clunky's cage fell. Instead of looking at his arms and waving, he looked scared and shook his head, going as he flared his arms. His speech bubble popped up. No, Clunky not safe now. Why did Lanky friend do that? Then, without even talking about how he collected green bananas, Banana Port sent him into the tag barrel. My interview was starting to turn into a slight concern by this point, but I forged on just to see what I was getting into. Bad idea. After collecting the golden bananas from Clunky's cage, I sent Lanky to the tag barrel. As he jumped, instead of making his usual noise, he seemed to say, "Oh no." When inside the barrel, he looked over his shoulder to Tiny, who was jumping and stopping with some sort of determined deranged. And it sounded like she was actually saying the words "pick me now," speaking each word as her feet stomped the floor. The other Kongs seemed a bit scared, especially Chunky, who was biting at his nails. I took the long way around to select him, and as the cursor passed over D and DK, they both seemed to say please before going to their usual animation of disappointment of not being picked. When Clunky was selected, he got to his knees and begged to be picked. I did so right away. All the while, Tiny was throwing a fit. When Clunky hit the floor, he wiped his forehead as the parrot came down to tell him about the 5 golden bananas to collect. A few moments of hesitation later, I paused the game, saved it, and turned it off for the rest of the day. I was giving myself some time to do other things, as well as ponder about what I just witnessed. After a couple of hours, I decided to call up my brother and ask him if he had done something to the DK64 cartridge. He asked if I had lost it, and I told him about what was going on and what had happened. He swore that he had nothing to do with it, and that he had not hacked the cartridge. It sounded like he was telling the truth. With my prime suspect shot down, I was left wondering what could have possibly caused all of that. Not that it mattered much, but unlike most stories of this nature, my dreams were normal, as far as I can remember. As I got up the next morning, my first thoughts were about DK64 and whether or not I should erase the file and start anew. After I had breakfast though, I just could not help but wonder what was going to be next, so I went back to the N64 and started up the game. A little bit unexpected by me, the title screen and intro were normal. As I got to this file screen, select screen, however, I noticed that the banana of the file, which had the game data with Tiny, was peeled. The banana inside was purple, the same color of bananas Tiny was supposed to collect. Supposing it was supported to be a message, I choose the file and noticed something off. In Lanky's place, there was a blue X. As far as I knew, that was never there before. I felt a few butterflies in my stomach as I pressed the A to start playing, but as it loaded, everything seemed fine. The music was normal, nothing was wrong with the map, and DK seemed to control fine. I felt a bit relaxed. I relaxed a bit, and had DK jump into the tag barrel so I could choose Chunky and go back to Fantic Factory. That was when I saw it. Lanky was laying flat on his back, immobile. His long arms were sprawled out behind him. His eyes were closed, his tongue laying out of his mouth, and there was a slit on the side of his overalls. It did not take much examination to tell that he was dead. Instinctively, my eyes wandered over to Tiny, who was not throwing a fit at this time. Instead, she just was waving like normal. I swore I saw a glint of something from her left side. Just to see what would happen, I scrolled over to Lanky and pressed the A button to select him. All that happened was a speech bubble came up from Tiny. That won't work. Lanky won't be necessary anymore. After continuing I sat there for several seconds, just trying to wrap my head around what just took place. I was beginning to fear what would be next, but I suppose that just drove me to continue. I shook my head, then scrolled over to Chunky and continued to Frantic Factory. After collecting a few golden bananas with Chunky, I decided that I would focus on collecting bananas to feed Scoff with, so that I could use Tiny for the boss. I ran around as Chunky until he got his banana medal for 75 bananas. Then I went to the tag barrel to get out Diddy, and the selection popped up. I noticed that Lanky was still there, in the same position. Tiny had resumed stomping up and down as she had the day before. For whatever reason, seeing that made me think that I should go ahead and feed Scoff Chunky's bananas, so I kept him and went through the portal. Trollf and Scoff seemed oblivious to the stipulation, and the blue hippo happily ate Chunky's green bananas. After Chunky ran dry, I saw him back into the tag barrel, and Tiny was still throwing her fit. Lanky was still there, dead, and the fly, similar to the one in the big Bug Bash bonus game, was flying around him, almost cosmetically so. I noticed that both DK and Diddy seemed to be shuddering and just barely glancing over at the deranged Tiny's direction. I noticed that I was too. It made me think that I should probably erase the data and start anew, but no one ever accused me of being that bright. Instead, I avoided Tiny and went to Diddy, who seemed to think whoever he believed was the power above before he fell out of the... You seemed to thank whoever he believed was the power above before he fell out of the barrel. As I ran through the levels finding red bananas for Diddy, I started to notice that the enemies were not accusively pursuing him as they usually would. They would still give chase if he got too close, but he had to be much closer than usual to prompt the action. Perhaps it was just my imagination gone wild. Then again, perhaps the enemies were just showing pity for the Kongs. Either way, I still ran through the level, picking up bananas as well as a couple of golden bananas, since they were on the way, until Diddy had his banana medal as well. I quickly sent him to see Toph and Scoff and filled the blue hippo with more bananas. I was close to the goal to meet the boss, so I hurried and put Diddy into the tag barrel. That's when I saw that Tiny had struck again. Chunky was flat on his stomach, arms out to his side. There were several tears in his shirt, and his tongue lolled out of his mouth. His neck was twisted as a grotesque angle, where I could see the bones pressing out. More flies were flying around Lanky. I could see holes on his body. I assumed the flies were eating his rotten corpse. I felt like throwing up, but I managed to stomach it as I looked at DK and Diddy. Both were just looking at the bodies. Tiny was waving again, as she was the first time I saw Lanky's body. In her hand, however, was a large knife. I went to go select Chunky, knowing that Tiny would say something, and she did. "You should have ignored me." That was all the speech bubble said. DK and Diddy looked horrified, and I am sure I did as well. Just wanting to get it over with, I went around to select DK and took him out of the barrel. I must have been panicking as I started making sloppy mistakes. I ran into a few enemies, missing some easy jumps, and even forgot how to pull the gun a few times. Even so, I managed to get a few more golden bananas as well as 90 of DK's bananas. It was enough to finish feeding Sculf, so I went to the portal and proceeded to the feeding pad. However, as soon as DK hit the pad, the camera zoomed in on Toph, and the speech bubble came up. "Are you sure you want to do that, DK?" But I knew it. The screen had turned dark. I was given the option to press A for yes and B for no. I was not expecting that, so I already pressed the A button. DK started to feed Sculf until he was fat enough to push Toph's pedestal to the key. Toph leaned over and locked the door, and the faces of the Kongs flashed by, except for Lanky and Chunky, who had blue and green X repetitively. As expected, it landed on Tiny's face. However, as it did, it suddenly turned into a purple question mark, as if she was not unlocked. At first, I did not think it was possible, but given what had already happened, I was not too surprised when I found Titty was gone when I had DK jump into the tag barrel. What I did find inside, though, what did make me lose the contents of my stomach. Lanky's corpse had so many holes in it, they were deep enough that you could see his ribs, his lungs, stomach, and some of his skull. Chunky now had an arm missing, and you could see the tendons hanging down where it was ripped off. His shirt and back were ripped open, and you could clearly see his spine. From the way it looked, it was as if something had taken a few bites out of him. D was not in the best shape either. He was on his side, and he was missing one of his legs and his tail. Both wounds were trickling blood. However, he was still moving, somehow alive. As I quickly selected him, he started to speak with his speech bubble. "Tiny, watch out for not safe." This was all he could say before the speech bubble. Jeez. Sorry about that, guys. This was all he could say before the speech bubble cut itself off. Diddy stopped moving. His chest was no longer rising and falling. It appeared that DK was the last Kong. I had to walk for a bit after that, but I could not bring myself to turn the game off. I just had to finish, but I could not do it right away. Not after what I just saw. Before I took a break, I had DK exit the tag barrel and pause the game so that I would not have to witness the gruesome sight upon walking back. I went out to have lunch. While I was out, I called my brother again and told him what happened that morning. He proceeded to call me a liar. I told him that if he wanted to see proof, to just head over and see for himself. Something in my voice must have gotten to him, because he got quiet. Eventually he spoke to me in a serious voice. He told me that it would probably be best if I stopped playing the game before I started to think it was real. I just brushed him off with a joke. However, something about how I was acting must have been off, because when I looked around, I noticed that people were looking at me rather funny. I told my brother I would call him later, hung up, then hurried out the door and back to my car. After seeing it for what seemed like hours, I started it up, took in a deep breath, and headed back home. When I got back to my house, I was not sure what to expect. I slowly walked back to the game, all of those different possibilities playing through my head of what I would see on the screen. To my amazement, nothing horrific or out of the place was there. Feeling a little relieved, I unpaused the game and tried to think about what to do. I moved DK around the room a bit, until I swore I heard a plinking noise. Going up to the bus door, I saw that the key to K, Lumsey's cage, was just sitting in front, acting as if it belonged there. Curiously, I touched it with DK, and it acted as if it was a legitimate nab. Though DK seemed as confused as I was. He looked around widely in all directions. The animation ended, and the portal to Toph and Scoff closed. However, before I could do anything, the game sent DK outside the Frantic Factory on the overworld map. At this point, I just thought the game was playing itself, but I was still somewhat in control. I moved DK out of the lobby and went to unlock the lock to K, Lumsey's cage. As the key turned, he started to celebrate. Yet to my surprise, the camera panned to the outside, and the rock that held the canyon to Fugi's forest broke. It was not supposed to do that until you got the key from Glumsy Glannon. With the way things were going, I knew it was intentional. I felt knots tying themselves in my stomach, but I kept going. I sent DK to the cannon and let it fire him off to his next destination. As DK entered the lobby, I noticed that B locker was not in front of the portal. The portal was just opened. Also, the color of portal was off. The background part of it was red, and the letters DK were blue. I knew it was not going to be facing a pleasant time, but as I said before, no one accused me of being bright. I sent DK inside and attempted to brace myself for what would come. I felt miserable, and I let out a few frightening noises after I saw what I just walked into. Fungi Forest was nowhere to be seen. Instead, I found myself in what the games seem to call Tiny's Torture. The map was like something out of Dante's Inferno, or so I thought at the time. The ground was just gray, with the dirt path a lighter shade. The place was bleak and devoid of all color and life, except for the background, but even that felt lifeless. All there was to see was a raging inferno of flames and fireballs, as well as the sound of faint crackling. In the place where the clock would have been for Fungi Forest, there was a giant stone statue of Tiny. It had a stoic look, and its eyes were wide and made of rubies, with some black materials for pupils. One hand was raised level with its head, and it held a clock in the shape of a lantern. Each tick echoed menacingly through the map, as it too signaled that there was not much time left. And the other hand was lowered to its side. It held the stone likeness of DK's head, with the mouth a grape and missing one eye. The camera hung on that shot for a full minute. The more I looked at it, the more I noticed that it was shaking. My stomach felt like a rock. My heater was on, but I felt rather cold. And was shivering uncontrollably. I felt tears going down my cheek. Even so, I could not stop now. I just had to know what was going to happen. The camera swung back to DK, who was shuddering and rubbing one of his arms, and I could hear him whimpering. It was then I noticed that there was no music playing. The only sounds that could be heard were the crackling of the fire and the echoing ticks of the clock. Everything just felt heavy, as if the end was truly near for both DK and myself. The clock went back to the statue of Tiny, and its speech bubble was produced from the mouth area. "I'm sorry if I seemed angry," the statue said, "but it was rude of you to ignore me. I never ignored you. It left me felt dead inside. All I wanted was attention." A yell screeched through the area after the message ended. It sounded like Tiny, but with a lower pitch. Then the speech bubble came back. "But you just forgot all about me. Do you know how that hurts? I showed Lanky and Clank, Chunky and Diddy. And now, I'll show you." Another yell screeched through. The statue blinked twice, and the mouth slowly formed into a scowl. The lips opened to show teeth. The speech bubble came back after the scowl was complete. "I didn't want to make this easy on you." The camera panned back to DK, who looked as horrified as I am sure I did. In front of him, a tag barrel appeared in the air. I thought it was gray as the ground, and I looked at it. I noticed that the faces of the other Kongs were there, except Tiny, of course. Each of their heads looked very disfigured, and their fur was mangled and dirty, or so it appeared. "Go. Be reunited with the ones you lost," the statue said. "See if you can survive." seemed like a good idea to obey the tiny statue, so as soon as I regained control of DK, I had him hop into the barrel. I immediately wished I had not. I almost screamed at the sight that invaded my eyes. The slaughtering Kongs were black, but in a zombie-like state. They were all gray, and each of them had spots that were not fully healed, allowing me to see their bones, their internals. I could even see Lanky's beating heart. None of them moved until I scanned over them, and even then, the movement was slight. Unable to think of what to do, I just chose Chunky. As he hit the ground, his large intestine fell out of his hole and his abdomen. When I moved him, he stepped on it, making a grotesque squish sound. Just the sight of it made me feel a pain in my lower gut. It took me a while to regain my composure. When I did, I just started to move Chunky towards the tiny statue, as there were not any of the tunnels that would normally lead to the other areas of fungi forest. With each second, the ticks echoed. It felt like it was going to drill digging into my eardrums, trying to find its way into my brain. Without warning, after a few minutes of stumbling towards the statue, a strange creature came out of nowhere. It had a hunchback and its head was tilted at an odd angle. It had long brown claws, blue eyes had sunk back into the sockets, and a mouth full of long yellow fangs. It ran its claws straight through Chunky's gut. The melon health meter did not show up. Instead, the camera just went back to the tag barrel. Zombie Lanky came out, however I could not see the sight of the creature skinking its fangs into Chunky's head, spewing the lifeless body all over the lifeless ground. I could not even move the joystick as I watched the gruesome display. I felt paralyzed. I accidentally hit the B button though, which made Lanky's arm extend as usual, except this time, as it reached full length, the clay wrist snapped off and made his hand fly towards the creature, hitting it and making it look in Lanky's direction. It dropped when was left of Clunky's and sprayed on all fours towards Lanky. I still could not touch the controller. I just let it happen. I grabbed Lanky, I hoisted his rotten body over its head and ripped him in half. His entrails spilled into the beast, staining it with gray, lifeless gore. And it was then that I noticed that the creature was wearing a dimit outfit of sorts and a white peel flower on it. That's when I realized that thing was tiny. I kept feeling sicker and sicker as the camera hung on Lanky's top half, which Tiny discarded to the ground. She had gone back to Chunky's corpse and resumed devouring it as Diddy came out. I grabbed the controller again and had him run back towards the portals. I could feel my heart beating hard as I turned the camera around to put it behind Diddy. I began to beat even faster as I saw that portals was not even there. It was just a gray wall, with no hope of exit. In a panic, I turned him around and started to run around to the other side of the map. Tiny did not seem to notice Diddy, but I did not want to take any chances. I kept pressing B to make Diddy do his cartwheels in attempts to make him move faster. Each time he did a cartwheel, though, clumps of his decay fur fell to the ground, exposing more holes in his body. I had felt this strange feeling to take at least Diddy or DK to the tiny statue, so despite my fear, I changed Diddy's course to it. As it drew closer, the motion rotated the camera to look where I saw Tiny. I let out a yelp as I saw there was nothing there. not even a corpse of Chunky. Despite I smashed on the B button, trying to vain to make Diddy move at March speed or something, it was no use. From above came this horrid version of Tiny, laying on top of Diddy and smashing him into a disgusting display of violence. His goalie blood sprayed upon the ground, and several of his internals spewed out. Tiny leaned out and started to devour what he could of her, killed once again. DK fell out of the tag barrel shortly after, and I wasted no time. I had him head to roll towards the statue, not sure what it would accomplish, but feeling that it would at least do something. Perhaps it was just my imagination. But the ticks from the clock seemed to grow louder, and the echoes lasted longer. It felt like all my warmth had fallen to my feet, though I could feel myself starting to sweat. My eyes just focused on DK, the only being with color on the map, except for the crackled flames. It was hard to hear under the ticks, but I swore I heard Tiny's growling on D in the distance. My right leg started to shake uncontrollably as I guided DK to the statue. Though it seemed like an impossible goal, it was like one of those dreams when you try to get to the door at the end of the hallway, but it was always just out of your grasp. I kept trying though. It seemed like the only thing to do. Never got a chance to see what would happen. With a finally deafening tick, the clock stops and text flashed across the screen. Time ran out. DK stopped in his tracks, shaking and looking around before Tiny swooped in and grabbed him. After that, the screen faded black. I thought my chest was going to collapse on itself. My heart was working so hard, I just did not know what to expect, as I knew that I did not want to see it. My body felt like a stone, but I got up and reached for the power switch on the N64 and turned it off. I was not sure if that was a bad move. Even though the switch went down, the orange light stayed on. The N64 was still running. It seemed that. Whether I liked it or not, I was going to see DK's fate. And I sat back down on the couch. I felt like his fate was going to be my fate as well. The screen started to come back into focus again, and what I saw forced me to look away a bit, as I knew what was going to happen. DK was strapped into a torture device of some sort. Iron bands with ropes were tied around his wrists and ankles. The device was laying against the scoured face of the tiny statue. He struggled in vain against his bonds. As the camera panned back to show that there was a balcony in front of him. On it was Tiny, in her regular form. The camera swung to a close-up of her face. She wore a sadistic, toothy smile as the speech bubble popped up. No one else to pay attention to but me now. She let out a giggle laugh, only me to play with after I'm done with DK. She pulled out her feather crossbow and fired it at one of the eyes of the statue. Wheels attached to the torture device began turning, pulling on the ropes that were tied to the iron bands on DK's wrists and ankles. They started to pull them apart. DK let out a yell of pain as Tiny walked closer to him, brandishing a bloody knife. The camera focused me into first-person view from DK's perspective and made me watch through his eyes. A sunny face turned from a sadistic smile to a look of pure rage. She stabbed the knife violently, right into DK's gut. I felt as if she had stabbed me too. Though it was just an illusion, I yelled out in pain and looked down at my gut just to make sure I was not open. It was not cut open. When I looked back up, Tiny was reaching into the cut she made into DK's and pulled out his small intestine. I felt sick as in pain as she ripped at them with her teeth, clawing away at them. Splattering of gore sprayed with each bite. I could not hold it in. I threw up all over the floor. The creak of the wheel turning was all I could hear, other than DK's yell of pain. He looked around and forced me to look at his arms and legs. The sick tearing sound invaded my ears. My shoulder and hip started to ache. I felt it was because I knew what was going to happen to DK. It seemed like an eternity of agony before the camera swung out of first-person view and focused on DK just before his arm was torn by the device. Tiny slurped out of his intestine and laughed with the gore of her lips. DK's arm was the next to go. With the soonest of muscle hanging out of the wound, both of his legs were ripped off seriously. The blood poured out of him as well as he let out a last yell of pain. The screen then faded to black again, and Tiny came into focus. Her hands were behind her back, an evil smile on her face, and she just giggled. Her speech bubble popped up. I think you've learned your lesson. Now back to the beginning and do it right this time. After that, she faded away, and the game over showed on screen. I was sent back to the title screen with Diddy doing his mind card game. Hesitantly, I hit the start button and went to the file select screen. The file had the game data was erased completely, showing no trace of what just happened. After that, the system finally turned off, leaving the TV screen dark. I slowly got up, turned off the TV, and went to go get a paper towel so I could clean up my puke. A few days later, for whatever reason, I started the game again. I started a new game, got to the point where I unlocked Tiny and then picked her. The game has been running perfectly ever since, with no immortals. I don't think I will be ever attempting that challenge run ever again.